Can I just show you something, all of you? I came across recently a cache of my college papers, including several that I wrote in 1964 for Forrest. And
Forrest?
Oh,
uh,
wow.
and we think of Forrest as a guy who who doesn't like to be directive. Well, that's true in a setting like this or in a classroom, but it's not so true when it comes to papers. This was I think, a 6-page paper, an examination of the liberal philosophies of Luther and Calvin. And aside from, a lot of red marking through the paper, this was a page of general commentary that he gave me. This man,
That was pre-computer.
yeah.
It's impressive.
Well, he was determined to teach this boy to write, and I don't know if he succeeded, but I think, Forrest, I'll share copies of those with you if you like sometime.
Yeah, I would. Yeah. Okay. Okay, well, maybe we better get started and see if other people will join us. So I asked you to look carefully at the very first paragraphs of the ethics. Let's see, Richard, would you mind reading that opening?
Sure.
Every art and
technical skill, every systematic method associated with those, and in the same way, every action and choice seems to aim at something good.
Okay.
That's why. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
That's why they were right to propose that good is what all things strive for.
Okay. Do one more. Do the next paragraph too.
But it seems there are two different kinds of goal. Some of our goals are activities, and some are various products beyond them. And where there are goals beyond our actions, in those cases, the products are by nature greater goods than the activities.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what sense did you make of that?
Should I start?
Yeah.
I want to apologize for not having a bookshelf behind me. I do have a few books that I could have pretended with. Okay, so if one were to stop at that first sentence,
Yeah,
and think about what it's saying, I presented to myself a hypothetical. Let's say that Aristotle had a neighbor who had honed his skills on stealing. And he was very good at stealing Aristotle's goats. And it was for the ultimate goal of feeding himself, which was a good. And the sentence here reads, and setting aside the fact that if we read on, we know that happiness is an important component of the state, of the flourishing state. But if we stop at that sentence and try to understand what he's trying to say, we understand that good has multiple explanations. And good is not honing a skill for stealing. Is good the ultimate goal of feeding himself? But this doesn't fit into the state's understanding of happiness being its ultimate goal, happiness in a virtuous life that leads to a flourishing state. So if one reads on into Aristotle, we understand more what he means about the statement of all acts being, every action is thought to aim at some good, but it's not taking into consideration necessarily acts that are not virtuous. Now, how does everyone understand that hypothetical?
Well, my marginalia, because Forrest had us focus on these first three paragraphs,
I immediately wrote up evil doers, Iago, Edmund from King Lear, Satan, and I started to analyze their um, goals. What were their goals? And and like Tony, I think I said, wait a minute, this generic statement that he's making that all goals lead to good was, it depends on your point of view. And those guys were evil personified according to their authors, Satan, Iago, Edmund, etc. So I immediately, Forrest asked us, do you have any quarrel with the statements? And I found myself agreeing with the words, but disagreeing with the uh, conclusion. Anyway, it set me off and made me think, oh, here we go again. Forrest has got me stumbling around, thinking too hard.
But if you read on, or you read the preface, you understand that it's much more complicated in what he's referring to as being good.
Yes, which I did.
Good beneficial or good right and wrong.
You got to think about it.
Right. Well, you got to start somewhere, and he starts with this broad statement, which then gets explicated and qualified as he goes along. But I thought of it this way. I just made a mental list the other day of everything I had done that day, and I admit that my days are not as exciting, perhaps, or as varied as they used to be. But it was hard not to define everything that I did as aiming at something good. Not in the sense of, writing huge checks for good causes or anything like that, but something good for myself. Not that which is different from pleasure, because some of the things I did were not particularly pleasurable, like getting down on the floor and doing push-ups, but aimed at something larger than that. They were that wasn't the goal. That was an activity leading to a goal. And if nothing else, the goal was to make me feel better about myself. I think that I think is really all he is saying, that we seek. I don't want to say pleasure, because that limits too much what he is saying. But we seek what we want for ourselves.
Now, how Richard, are you addressing Charlie's challenge? Satan and Iago and the rest.
They're seeking good for themselves. They're aiming at good for themselves. It's subjective. It's not universal. It's subjective. As are my goods subjective. They're not.
But it's not a good. It's beneficial. But it's not a good in terms of right or wrong. It's good in terms of beneficial.
I don't think we're there yet. We're not there yet. We may never get there. Some people never do. But although I assume we will. But good, I think here just has to be understood much more broadly, in the sense of a subjective benefit for an individual.
So it's what they think is good
for themselves.
For themselves.
But that is not necessarily what's good for the state.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Charlie, does that answer your qualms?
No, because when I started to think about Edmund and Iago and Satan, so to speak, I could not really translate their actions, activities, or their products, so to speak, into things that were good. They were evil acts and evil intentions and evil products. Therefore, not all goals lead to good.
Good.
No, but I would say that, Aristotle really doesn't address evil. He's addressing the good. And I think it is troublesome that you have to think, well, someone murdered somebody and they did it for the good, and the good being their own satisfaction. I think it just, had I written a book, I would have put in more about evil people, but he did not. And of course, his goal is to teach us how to be good, not to teach us how to be evil. But you have to analyze someone who commits a murder as doing something for good, for themselves, which is good. Now, does that lead to the good life? That becomes later an issue, but not addressed right here at the beginning.
No, this is
So it's really the formulation that Richard gave. It's a subjective good that the person thinks is good for that person.
I think we have to remember that an overall theme of this book is statesmanship. How does one construct a state for the maximum good of its people? And clearly, you pass laws to encourage certain kinds of behavior and to discourage other kinds. It's not a matter of everybody getting to do what they think is good. It's finding on that kind of level, it's finding the right balance.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately Aristotle is also saying that for the individual, it's also a matter of finding the right balance and using reason to guide choices. Not everything that might satisfy you at the moment is a good, and you need to think about that and realize it. That fudge brownie I had the other night after doing the push-ups, maybe that wasn't so good. But there's no law against it. So there you go.
Okay, Ron, you look like you have been itching to say something.
I'm itching a little bit. I think in these initial paragraphs, Aristotle is laying out some terms of his discourse. He's defining some of the parameters and some of the concepts that he's going to develop later on. The good that he uses, I think, in this first and second paragraph, third paragraph, these are operational definitions of the relationship between considering alternatives and choosing a particular course. And he defines the end of that course as a good, not in the ethical sense, but in the sense of the mechanics of rational consideration. And so what we have here, I think, are terms of art that build on each other as the dialogue progresses. And this introduction simply doesn't presume the ultimate solution, which comes later on. I think the other point that I wanted to make is, and I'm echoing a comment already put on the table, which is that Aristotle really doesn't define in any absolute sense what is good and what is evil. I mean, he defines the process through which we muddle through the alternatives and discover our own predilection to seek, discover, and then most importantly, to act on good.
Uh, and
But
I'm sorry.
is it good for that person that he or she thinks is good?
Yes.
Sometimes.
So it's, in many ways, it's a kind of statement of observed um human behavior, a kind of psychology.
You know,
This,
there's
this is the way human beings operate.
you know, a lot of what Aristotle's doing here at the beginning of these dialogues is characterizing the human condition, inferring from observations about the way in which human beings conduct their affairs differently than plants, differently than animals. But I mean, he's definitely operating in the realm of natural philosophy. This is he's inferring from lots of observations, lots of very in-depth and precise observations, uh, how it is that we find our own principled way through life. It's fascinating. I mean, this is more like 16th and 17th century natural philosophy than it is some kind of analytic philosophy or metaphysical philosophy, starting with first principles. He's working from observations. This is inductive. This is inferential.
Okay, so this you said it's 17th and 18th century natural philosophy. Isn't what Aristotle saying true today as it was whenever in the past? This is the human condition.
Yeah, I think it's a if he was the first to say it, that was all he really needed to say. It seems to me. I mean, if he'd never said anything else, he had made an observation about human behavior, which to me anyway seems to hold up. Where we go with it, we'll have to talk about. But this is I think it's a great starting point, because it does seem to me to capture what we do as human beings without necessarily even thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, a lot of it isn't a matter of.
I would say that.
Go ahead, Mike.
I would say, I mean, this is a self-help book, maybe the original one, but the very first self-help book on the bookshelf of how to live a better life.
A TED Talk. I think.
Yeah, but it's a TED Talk, but he is looking at how people are, and this is so much different than Plato, who the good is some kind of ethereal form. Aristotle's having none of that. He's saying this is how people act, and Richard's right. It is, and Ron, it's empirical, and it's purpose driven, and he's not being very abstract. He's really studying, here's how humans behave. And it's pretty insightful given that it's 3,000 plus years old.
So what he says is as true of Iago and Edmund and Satan as it is of anybody else. Charlie?
Yeah, I mean, I liked Richard's quick reflection on his daily activities, and that led me to look at my to-do list, which I wrote yesterday morning. And every day, you write a little note to yourself to how you're supposed to get going and what you're supposed to do.
That's very long. A long list.
But the utility is, as Mike suggests, is very, very practical, because you then can say, well, which of my two on my to-do list are the most important, and why, if you want to bother going through that analytical step. Our family used to gather together at the beginning of the year, and and me, and then the two children, and we would write our goals for the year. And then we would circulate them to the right, and each member of the family would comment upon the goals for the year of mom, dad, or brother or sister. And then they'd keep passing them around. So when it came back to you, you had the comments of it. Oh, do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. They rank them, in terms of importance. Well, I never thought to analyze them in ethical grounds, in terms of whether anything I was planning on doing was good, bad, or indifferent. It was just something that needed to be done. So this is a useful tool to think through your day and life.
Except that when I think of to-do lists, one reason I don't make them is because to me, a to-do list tends to be the things that need to be done, and often for which I see no obvious good purpose. That is, the things that come more naturally, that we don't need to think about, are the things that we know at some level are going to make us feel better immediately or in the longer term. But then there are other things that maybe our conscience tells us we ought to be doing, or maybe it's not a matter of conscience. Maybe it's just a matter of practicality, but without necessarily having a kind of payoff. And if that's the case, then those are the kinds of things that are going to get, pushed to the back of the closet, it seems to me, as opposed to the things that are going to make us feel.
I agree with that. My to-do list is like today's foundation for my future. So if I clean the house, then I'm really building toward a future that's more comfortable. So in an environment where I can be more happy, is that a word here? So it's not just things I need to do or ought to do. It's often things that I aim to do.
Mm-hmm. It's a means to an end.
Yeah.
And Forrest, you notice that he uses the word conscience.
Yes, I saw that. Yeah. Karen, you look like you want to say it.
Yes, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and it said instead of doing a to-do list, you should have a to-love list. And that we care about we exercise for our physical health. We meditate for our mental health, but we are not looking at our social health. And you make a list of the people and the things you want to connect with for the greater good. Yeah. And you exercise those skills and you exercise those relationships. And I just thought that was a very interesting way, because I'm a big to-do list person. And that to love list has really kind of changed things. But in looking at the first couple of paragraphs, now I was looking at it through the lens of how I was feeling at that moment, and I had just turned off the news. So the first paragraph, which says the choice seems to aim at something good, and immediately, for whom? Good for whom? And we've been talking about that. And if it's good for yourself, is it the greater good? But my lens was looking at what I perceived as evil in the world. And that's why they were right to propose the good is what all things strive for. And in my marginalia, Charlie, I wrote, I wish. So even though, Aristotle is my people, I'm Greek, I was like, boy, you are naive. And it's the person that sits down, whoever you are that moment, to read those words, I find with him. And I came back to it this morning and I read it again, and I thought a little differently about it. But one of our classmates said, after 3,000 years, this still plays. And I'm so grateful that it does. And Ron, you were very helpful to me when you were talking about the mechanics of rational consideration in terms of art. I said, okay, I can accept that for now and build on that as the reading continues. And unlike you, I haven't read ahead because I know you know the whole story at this point. I know you're a no, Ron. I've had class with you before. Spoiler alert.
Okay. Lucy, did you want to enter in?
Let me unmute myself there.
There you go.
Thank you. I hope I read what I was supposed to read, and I'm sorry I was a little bit late. So I'm catching up with what you all are talking about.
Okay.
It makes me wonder about people, list makers, and where that came from. I wonder about that and why we do the things that we do, and where those urges have where did they originate? And is it because of our upbringing? Our parents wrote lists, so we write lists, or something like that, or not just lists, but anything that we do. So, yeah, I do think about the conscious things. That I like that word, and what we unconsciously do and acknowledge without even thinking. But I hope I read everything. We're doing the first 3 paragraphs of book 1.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
all. That's as far as we've gone.
Yeah, it's hard to read, but
Yeah.
I love listening to the comments. It clarifies it more for me. Thanks.
Okay. Karen mentioned several times for the greater good. And Aristotle suggests that among all those things, there is somehow a greater good that everything else is subsumed under. And that's what he's going to try to pursue.
Yeah, well, if you don't have, I think he said, I'm not sure if it's in the first 3 paragraphs, but if you don't have the greater good, then you have an infinite chain of goods that just lead to vacuous life or whatever. And so there has to be an end. And so each good leads to another good, leads to another. It has to stop somewhere. And that's the greater good.
Mhm.
But
So if I may ask, so are you saying that it's a vacuous life if it is absent of the good, so that everyone who has no conscience and can commit only evil acts, they have a vacuous life?
No, it's more of a technicality of his philosophy. So that if I do something, if I get money, and I don't want money just for its own sake. I want money so I can spend it. Like right now, I'm at Rehoboth Beach spending money, and that creates pleasure for me. And in Aristotle, you have to, if you keep going up that chain, you just have to end somewhere. And that's why he says there has to be a greater good, because the logic of his structure requires that since you're going, everything has another reason for doing it, there has to be a top reason. I don't think, but your point about your life is also true, because the ultimate good is a fulfillment, or a fulfilling life, a rich life. And he would probably say, if you're not doing good, you don't achieve that rich life.
I think one of the magic acts
But they might find it rich, whether it's good or evil, those that commit only evil acts and are satisfied, they might consider that rich. But to those of us who try to steer away from evil acts, that would be considered a vacuous life.
Ron?
One of the things that Aristotle's already set in motion here is the consideration that it's the process of sorting through options and alternatives. It's the process of discovering what a principled life is in action that is indeed the ultimate goal of this string of connected goals. It's the process becomes the end result that we're striving for. It becomes the considered life. So, I mean, this is a completely different track from one in which we're trying to discriminate between what's good and what's evil. I mean, to the extent that we apply our rational sense to sorting through our list of to-dos every morning or to loves every morning, we are ascending. We are striving to become a more principled and ultimately a happier person. So, I mean, he's describing here, someone said this so well, I think it was Michael, this is a toolkit. This is, what shall I say? This is a how to be happier, how to be better, how to be more human, in Aristotle's sense, more rational, more in control of our future, more designing and calculating in terms of our character.
Okay.
So is happiness, I'm sorry, is happiness the supreme goal?
No.
What was
He's
that,
not a
Jody?
hedonist.
I said, is happiness then the supreme goal or the highest good?
No,
No.
No?
I
He's
think
not a hedonist.
he says statesmanship is the greatest goal.
Right.
Supreme goal.
Fulfilling life, a rich life,
Flourishing life.
flourishing life. I'm
But
sorry. Right.
You've reminded me that one of my other practices is to have 3 columns of goals. The short term, it's called short term, near term, and long term. And the short term goals are the to-do list, and the near term goals are the things you really need to or want to get at it. And the long term goals, now that Aristotle has helped me understand better, are more like what Karen was talking about in terms of greater good type things that you want to have accomplished for whatever purpose. And then Aristotle would add even a 4th column, which would be, statesmanship. Query, are any of the things that are on your short, near, and longer term list aimed at the greater good of all?
I think I'd like to suggest that we don't go that way, though, Charlie. I think that if it would be helpful if we just stick to the individual, the goal for the individual, apart from being a social, political animal. Mike offered the reason that there is a final end is a logical reason, that otherwise you're in an infinite degress or engross, and you never get any place because that goes on and on. So Mike was suggesting logically there's got to be a grand, simple end. But Aristotle isn't so much taking that tact. He has another reason. he has a reason, in which he is looking at human nature and saying, if you really think about human beings and what makes them different from other animals, is something that's bigger than any of the smaller goals, any of the things on the to-do list. There's one thing at the very end in terms of human psychology. Does that make am I making any sense there?
Yes.
Well, you're asking a question, right? You're
Yeah.
asking what
Yeah.
what is that thing? And
What is that thing?
um,
Well, before you go on, clearly that's a hard question that Aristotle is asking students. He's doing a lecture, uh, although we can say what he's asking of us.
What's the question again? What is that question?
The question is, in human psychology, if you analyze human beings, not talking about logic, but human behavior, uh, we have all these little things that we want to do for some reason or another to get rid of the itching conscience, as you were, or to pay those bills or whatever. But then in human nature, there is something that's beyond any of those other goals. And that's that's what he's struggling to try to get clear in the rest of this chapter by saying, well, here's what some people say, and let's look at that, and here's what some other people say. But how does that help us get there? Why
Um,
in human nature must there be an ultimate goal?
Forrest, if someone exists just purely for the goal of self-maintenance and pleasure and desire, be it bad or good or evil, they are not consciously or subconsciously thinking in terms of a higher goal. They're thinking in terms of staying alive and fed and doing things that bring them pleasure.
Right.
Now, some people, of course, have a higher goal that they strive for, be it a religious goal or a self-standards, whatever. But others just exist and maintain themselves and die. They're not thinking in terms of striving. And I think this is also human nature, that they're not striving for anything but self-satisfaction and food and maintaining oneself, and then they're gone. But they're not consciously saying in life, I want to strive for some, metaphysical higher goal. Does that make sense?
Well, how if there are a whole lot of people, or even a few people, who are not aiming for that greater good, how can Aristotle say that this is true of everybody?
Exactly.
That is the positive part. Why can he say that it's true of everybody, that there is this long-term, final, ultimate goal?
Because I think some people just come and go. They're not
Yeah.
having any goals.
Yeah. So how can he say what he says?
I think he's not, as someone just said, that he's not discussing, evil or self-maintenance or anything like that. He seems to be directing his goal. His aim is to talk about the higher good and happiness and the flourishing state rather than those that are non-productive citizens who come and go.
But you know from the rest of your reading that Aristotle is very aware that there are some people who are bad people.
Yeah.
So
So,
how
and what does he say about them?
yeah. Well, he says that they're not good people.
But how does that play into his theory, his master plan, that
Right.
all acts are for right?
Right. Yes.
I think
That's the big question.
I think he frames that issue not in terms of good or evil, but in terms of whether individuals have been adequately conditioned and inculcated with values through their family experience, through their community experience, through their experience as a citizen in a state. The question is, are they mature enough to conduct their own affairs or their city's affairs in a reasonable and rational way, consistent with that conditioning? And that's what brings them to a higher level of fulfillment, to the kind of happiness that he's seeking. It's not a happiness that's defined by some absolute good, but rather a happiness that's defined by this maturation process through which every human being, and I presume every city-state as well, goes through.
But Tony and others have pointed out that a lot of people don't live that way.
Yeah.
Well, in one of these paragraphs, he disallows the undergraduates or the immature students who might be sitting in on his class but don't have the appropriate level of maturity to appreciate what it is that he has to say.
Right.
So, I mean, he's judgmental, but not based on ethical terms, but he's judgmental based on this operant conditioning that he presumes a mature adult has achieved as a citizen, as a member of a family, etc.
This is why I think it's hard to continue the discussion entirely on the individual level, because at some point we have to reach the social, the social, and when Aristotle talks about flourishing is our ultimate goal, which means living a life that meets all our needs. I think that goes beyond our individual autonomous needs. We live in a world that's populated by other people with their own needs, and there has to be some accommodation of that. That's where statesmanship comes in. I think he would say that the ultimate happiness is ultimately not necessarily the sum total of all of the things you might want, but rather the things you might need, which include a social dimension that might limit some of those things that you want.
Yeah. Excuse me. I
point.
need to
Very well said.
I need to charge up this iPad, but my daughter-in-law didn't leave a wire for me. I don't think. Oh, no, that won't work. Sorry about this.
As we're all talking, I'm thinking we've used very useful words and concepts and so forth. And it seems to me I've been seeking a word which we haven't yet used, which is wisdom, as a product, if you will, of an assemblage of activities, goals, life processes, and so forth. And the word, I haven't spent enough time on chapter 1 here yet, understand what he means, but it seems to me it's a product of a series of filters that include a lot of stuff we're talking about. And I just wonder if that's helpful.
Charlie, is wisdom different in your mind than knowledge?
Yes, I think, again, my marginalia out of reading this chapter suggests that there is, that he suggests there is. Learning is one thing. It's think about the Forrest's career as a teacher. Well, he's teaching information. He's teaching authors ways of thinking and so forth. But in the end, knowledge is one thing, and wisdom is beyond it. And he's suggesting, I think, and I find it helpful to distinguish between the effort, the process, the objective, and the result. And if wisdom seems to be near what I felt, anyway, he was looking towards.
Like Solomon's wisdom in terms of understanding the difference between what is right and what wrong, whereas knowledge is not deciphering any kind of right or wrong. It's information, but wisdom being an ability to decipher right and wrong.
And that's what I like to think, using the teaching analogy again, and Forrest's efforts over 40 plus years, is not Richard's writing ability, but rather his wisdom in addressing questions and issues and objectives, and how he's going to organize his day. Not that he would put that on the list.
Is that right, Richard?
Is that right? Yes. I think so.
So is wisdom the ultimate goal?
Well, I don't know that. I mean, the ultimate goal is to live a virtuous life, exercising your capacities to the fullest. But that involves using your rationality as when necessary to control your irrationality. The fact is, what I want may come into direct what I think I want. What makes me feel good might conflict with what makes you feel good, and we can't live that way. So we have to exercise some rationality to decide how much of what I want is compatible with what you want. This is the social aspect of all of this, and I don't see how we can talk about as insightful as he is about the human, the individual psychology. He's also insightful about man being a social animal and having to live with other human beings, men and women being social animals.
You just introduced a word, virtue, and we haven't talked about that.
Since last spring.
It's been too long. It's been too long.
I mean, where does virtue play?
Yeah. I don't know.
Let me just do the link up with wisdom. So
about these.
So the wise person is the person who makes good choices in the way that Richard outlined. So to be wise is to act in a certain way. Wisdom is a noun that is useful, but really wisdom is all about acting. So it's a process. It's one of those things that Aristotle said at the very beginning is an action rather than a product.
Yes. Though he says in paragraph 3 something that still perplexes me, that he's talking about actions, further actions, and goods as being two kinds of goals, and he suggests that I'm sorry, products and actions, and he suggests that products are higher in his hierarchy of goals than are actions. Did anyone make better sense of that than I was able to? Love to hear your views.
Let me just correct you. Doesn't he say just the opposite? That the actions are more important than the product?
Yeah, the ultimate action goal.
Do it.
Yeah,
Do
I'm
it.
sorry. I was reading this and trying to think at the same time. Obviously, I'm good at doing more than one and a half
Well,
things.
am I correct in correcting you?
Yep,
That it's
you are.
actions. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
He does talk about.
Yeah.
Well, as soon as he talks about doing, we leave the realm of the individual, the hermit, the autonomous person, and we enter into the world of people, and that imposes different obligations on each individual than if we were living absolutely alone. And that I think this is where, well, I mean, rationality enters in even if you are living alone, but it becomes even more important in a social context.
So being just an individual engaged in activities is not in the end going to be a good life, is it? The hermit who's up in the air.
Well,
So-
I don't think he considers it in his. He doesn't give it much consideration. It's irrelevant. Maybe there are a few of them, but who cares? We're talking about people, real people in the real world.
Right.
That's what he's interested in, the real world.
Right.
All
Right.
of it, not just the people, but the natural world. And so right away we have to confront a kind of collective good or average good or something that takes into account everybody else who is just like us in wanting good for themselves and
wanting a greater good.
Yeah, but maybe that greater good is unachievable on one's own and can only be. The greater good is not simply the sum total of all the things that you think are good for yourself. The greater good also takes into account all of the other goods that people are seeking and tries to find some way of making choices among them, accommodating them if possible, but in some cases rejecting some as being, you can't do that because that's going to interfere with other people's goods. It's not very difficult to give examples of that. We may be getting beyond chapter 1 here. I frankly got a little lost as chapter 1 went on and on. I was very excited, by the way, by the introduction. I thought, boy, this guy is great. He's really telling me something. And then I thought, I began to lose my focus after the first insights of chapter 1. I don't know whether anybody else had that experience, but
Well,
okay,
it's a hard read.
Let's go to the rest of the book or chapter. Is it
Yeah.
all just faulty? Is that what you're saying, Richard?
Well, I'm not saying. I'm just saying I found it a bit unfocused, and maybe if I had gone on to chapter 2, it would have made more sense. But I didn't do that, and there were so many things that he takes up. There were a number of things that he takes up and then drops. you're following along, and then suddenly he says, well, that's all I'm going to say about that.
Yeah.
And you think, well, okay, that's 10 minutes I'll never get back, and
Uh-huh.
so after, I'd been fooled a few times. I think my eyes began to glaze a bit, and I just became a little less focused.
It becomes very intertwined.
Yes. Well, yes. Intertwined. That's a good one.
So one of the things he's
Mixed up.
saying as he goes on is to say, now let's look at what other people have said, because some people have said some good things. Probably, people are not all dummies, and so let's look at what other people have said. Isn't that what he's doing?
I think he is. Yes, he's reviewing the literature, as it were,
Okay.
some of which is more useful to him than other pieces, I guess.
But isn't that helpful in moving us along?
Well, I don't know. At some point, when the student says, "Can you repeat that, please?" I just came across that in book 8. I thought, yeah, boy, thank you.
Well, if you look at page 10, like line 24.
What book is this? I'm doing this by
This one, Aristotle.
So what are you saying about page 10?
Well, it says, I put a big circle around this. We're making great progress. We're right back where we started.
Yeah. I hope you get a sense of, or I hope you get Aristotle's sense of humor.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that kind of sums up what Richard was saying. We're making great progress. We're right back where we started. Though we still haven't gotten very far. If
So
any.
he's acknowledging that he's meandering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right, but there are some important elements here. I'm now that I'm going back to them. The fact of habits, habituation, that we can learn. We can learn to be good. In fact, we'd better learn to be good, and we should teach our children to be good. This is crucial. If you don't grow up with it, then if you don't develop that habit, then you're lost, really.
One of the mechanisms I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
One of the mechanisms that he seems to use repeatedly is to articulate, to itemize all the options and alternatives that might be available when he's considering next steps, or when he's thinking philosophically about how to sort things out, and then refuting each one of them in turn, the lesser credible, useful alternatives, and adopting by default the ones that fall through this the screening process. That's the kind of empirical based inductive rationale he seems to use repeatedly, and I find that interesting, especially matched and merged as it is frequently with the references to craftsmen or artists, and the process that they use to kind of experiment and test various solutions to their artistic problems or craft problems, and come up with solutions to those. So this is, I think, the model of the kind of rational screening out of alternatives for action, some being more ethical, more aligned with family values or city-state values, and some less.
So we get those examples of what he calls instrumental goals, but
Yes.
then that's not enough to kind of fully understand human nature, because people live, as Richard has said earlier, people live with other people. And so, in that sort of context, there's something more than just these instrumental goals. And he goes way back to fundamentals, doesn't he? He says, we could say the thing that is the ultimate end is living, just being alive. But on the other hand, that doesn't really distinguish human beings because other animals are alive. And kind of feeding your body, that doesn't set us off from other animals. What sets us off from other animals? Well, Richard has suggested, unlike other animals, we seem to be able to reason. And that's what sets us off. There's something special about human beings. We seem to be able to reflect. And we don't give other animals that ability.
Well, is anybody familiar with Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow? He's a Nobel Prize. He's a psychologist who won the Nobel Prize for economics. And in it, he argues that we all have system one, thinking fast. We are able to think quickly and don't go down that dark alley, don't walk over that bridge, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's system two, which is a slower, more reflective system that we all have that corrects our psychological behavior. Well, when I read Aristotle here, I'm thinking about, well, system three inserts arguably some kind of value judgment as well into our thinking process. And then I got knee deep in the complexities of all of that and didn't know where to go or where Aristotle was trying to lead me. But does that connect up with anything we're saying? It just occurs to me that it does.
I would suggest that maybe that the second and third kinds of thinking you're talking about are really one category, that the reflection is what is the expression of our virtues, as he puts it. That's the flourishing. That's what allows us to flourish. It's not flourishing by itself, but it's what allows us to think through our our choices and maybe remake them or unmake them or whatever may be necessary in a larger sort of context of well, I don't know what I'm saying there, but I didn't get a third. I'm just saying, what you were just describing, Charlie, made sense. I thought within what he told us. I don't know if we need a third category.
Well, it's just one step beyond Kahneman's system two is another filter, if you will, that adds some moral or virtue components to the actions. And if actions are more important than products, then query as we think through issues. you go from instinctive to reflective to query, am I doing the right thing type analysis.
Yeah. But doesn't Aristotle suggest that those things come naturally to us, that we have innately the capacity to understand, we'll call it right, kindness, generosity, fairness, etc. All of these, by the way, are social virtues. They're not individual virtues. Kindness means nothing to me if I'm alone. Kindness only means something if someone else is there. And that, again, I come back to everything that he talks about, it seems to me, is a social, every virtue is a social one. It's defined by being a member of society. And that just seems so much of an advance over Plato to me. I can't connect with Plato because he doesn't connect those dots. It's all about what's going on in his head, in my head, whatever, but not, I don't get that social dimension in Plato, but I certainly do in Aristotle from day one.
That third level might well be the creation of institutions, certainly the creation of laws, which emerge from institutions. Okay. So I'm sorry. That says very simply what Aristotle, I think, elaborates on in depth and in several places.
And I don't think that Aristotle thinks that everyone is capable of statesmanship. That is a special category of virtue or wisdom.
And virtuous actions or wise actions.
Yes. All right. Yes. I get these terms confused, character, virtue, wisdom, they all mean something in the context here of Plato, but, they have so many other possible definitions. But I do, in that sense, yes, I think maybe, going back to Charlie's paradigm there, that maybe there is a kind of third element. Maybe some people are capable of living virtuous lives in a social context, but couldn't instruct others or make laws for others, legislate for others, whatever.
Okay, so those special people, people who we most admire, you might say, why do we hold them in such esteem? He seems to suggest then that to come out to understand that question, then it's not enough to say simply that they are flourishing. We've got to be more specific, and we are able to be more specific. And the way that we do that is we think about, well, this kind of person, this ideal person that a number of you have spoken about, why do we call that person an ideal person? Unfortunately, Aristotle speaks entirely in terms of men instead of men and women, but we'll all assume that he means men in that broader sense, human beings. So, what is it about human beings that makes them so, these certain ones, that makes them so special? And he seems to suggest, well, a way to get a handle on this is to look at what are the virtues that such a person has.
Forrest, this relates to a question I have shared with you that for me seems to permeate almost everything that he talks about, and that is the core question of everyone is capable of committing evil. What is it that stops them? What is happening within something deeper, or as Aristotle says, something else, or something higher, or maybe God? What is it within the human brain that is preventing them from committing evil? I mean, I keep going back to the word conscience, which is never used in his language, but that may be referred to in a lot of different ways. But it is that core question that relates to what is it that makes that virtuous? Why does that person happen to have virtuous standards as opposed to somebody else? What's going on in the conscience of the human brain? Not whether or not they're physically healthy or physically endowed, but something else that's going on that is more metaphysical, that determines one's choice of being virtuous or being evil. And it is a choice.
Mm-hmm. That goes back to Charlie's earlier question. Well, what is it that in some people they don't develop that way? They are immature, even though they have matured in years. They are still immature in the sense that they do bad things.
And one can be endowed with a bigger brain or a smarter brain or olfactory glands or whatever, but that still doesn't address the choice to make do something right or do something evil.
Yeah. So one thing he says very clearly early on when he said, is that some people are just badly brought up, so they're not
And see,
taught.
I don't buy that. I don't buy that either, because
Oh, you don't? Why?
why?
Don't we allow for that? That some people just have not
Well, they can
brought up,
relate.
and that's why when they rob somebody in a store, we arrest them and try them, and if they're guilty, we put them in jail.
And they might have been raised in a loving, supportive household, and yet they've chosen to rob banks as a source of satisfaction.
Those seem to be inconsistent things.
Yeah, well, maybe.
If you've been brought up well, you don't go out robbing banks.
But likewise, if you haven't been brought up well, you should have innately the ability to determine and distinguish the difference between right and wrong, and therefore choose another path than the one in which you were raised.
So you join AA, for instance.
Well,
I mean, you've been living a bad life. You get drunk every other night, and you get angry with people, and so on. And finally, somehow, you begin to turn your life around. You join AA and go to the groups and all that, or whatever. You're lucky enough to find some way, but the odds are really against that.
the odds may be against it, but that doesn't mean it can't happen.
Right. It can happen, but only a few do that.
But as long as it can happen, then that renders that philosophy, not 100%.
I don't think that Aristotle acknowledges both nature and nurture, and I don't think he tries to select one over the other. He talks about innate characteristics, things that we are born knowing, and yet he also makes a big deal of the need to nurture those things, because while there may be things you're born knowing, that won't necessarily overcome a habituation in a different direction, I guess. I think in Aristotle, it's both, nature and nurture, and depends on too many factors to be able to analyze perfectly. But in a way, part of the role of the statesmanship is about creating the conditions which allow the best qualities of our nature to flourish, and also encourages the nurturing that is part of that process to have its full effect.
I think that Aristotle, I'm going to go back to the self-help analogy. This book is how do he goes through a process, you learn the golden mean, avoiding extremes, you create habits of virtue, and you're rational, and that leads to a type that leads to happiness. There's no doubt that happiness is part of it, but it also leads to a very fulfilling life, and it leads to a sense of you're working in the community. He's offering that as an end for people to follow the advice in this book. I think he allows for people that there are people who are not going to follow that advice, and but they're going to miss out on that great sense of having a fulfilling life. And I don't know what you say to those people, but he's offering a very big carrot out there, and he's offering, saying, follow my advice and you will get to this wonderful state of happiness, but it will be a enriching happiness, not just the hedonism of, oh, well, I'm happy for today. So I think that he would acknowledge, yes, people are not going to get there, but the purpose of the book is to help you get there, promote you getting there.
It's at several points in the dialogue as well, just to reinforce what you're saying, Michael. He talks about generally accepted wisdom or generally acknowledged truths. His empiricism is subject to exceptions, to alternative examples. He doesn't declare things to be absolutely true. He doesn't work in metaphysics. He works in radical empiricism, and based on his observation of human conduct, family life, city life, he makes certain inferences, but he always qualifies them. He says, this is generally accepted or generally acknowledged, or this is the case most of the time. So I think that complements and marginally extends the point that you were making as well. I mean, the kind of lessons we're learning here are lessons that have been gleaned from a lot of life experience and are being transmitted not as golden rules and not as absolute dictates with regard to good and evil, or a good life and a bad life, but rather as something that's useful most of the time and that is based on knowledge that's been gleaned from lots of examples, not 100% of everything observed, but a good portion of that, 80, 90%, whatever.
Okay. So, in the self-help book, as Mike interprets it, uh, what he is going to do is say, you know, these things we already know. That is, in the sense that there are people that we admire who we say, gee, that person is living a good life. And what do we mean when we say that? Well, there are certain characteristics that they have. They act in certain ways, and that's already known by us in a sense, but we haven't really zeroed in on it. But once we zero in on it, you know, to say that somebody is generous, that they are kind, uh, they are thoughtful, these are things that we already know to characterize people who we think are living a good life. So it's not uncovering any secrets.
Right.
This is a self-help book that is simply reminding us of things that we already know. Those of us who, like all of us here, are good people
Of
and
course.
good thinkers.
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily lead to happiness, does it?
Well, it depends upon what you mean by happiness, he says.
Well,
And then
yeah,
he says, you know, a lot of people think that means feeling good, but he says that really doesn't work out if you look
no,
at that closely.
no.
So happiness, yeah,
Happiness is not, to me, it doesn't seem like happiness is the goal.
right.
No.
Or you have to redefine it,
Yeah.
not as feeling good, but
Yeah.
as living well.
Yeah.
Living happiness means living well. It means flourishing, as he says.
So
Well, so I
A
can
good
think of
life.
sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead. Oh, I can think of a couple of examples of people who were very good people in our area. Harriet Tubman. She did all kinds of good things having to do with slavery. I don't know that she was ever a happy person. I think in the end, she felt so badly for who she couldn't save.
Hmm.
Same thing I think of when I think of the movie Schindler's List. He was very unhappy with who he couldn't help, but these were good people that did good things. So I don't think the goal here of being a good person is happiness. I think there's some kind of an intuitive nature of goodness that you can see it and feel it in other people, but they themselves may not experience that feeling. I don't know. Just thinking.
In fact, their innate modesty, which we might regard as a virtue, might prevent them from thinking that they've ever really measured up to some standard that they're holding for themselves. I went to a memorial service a couple of weeks ago for someone who now I'm thinking about him in this context. It just went on and on. The praise for what he did for other people, and I think we all came away just stunned by the quantity of it. We all knew parts of it, but we hadn't ever really seen everything laid out in this way. Now, I happen to think, and maybe because I'd like to, that he was a happy man. He lived 96 years, and this is what this is what he left behind. But who knows? I can't get inside his brain. Maybe he never felt that he was doing enough. I hope that wasn't the case. But I think that's a good point, Lucy. That some of the best people wouldn't call them, don't necessarily acknowledge or derive happiness or satisfaction from what they have achieved.
Yeah, so Lucy, Harriet Tubman was a virtuous person who understood the difference between right and wrong, and she defended that to the very end, but it didn't necessarily bring her happiness. And
Okay, but in these cases, you're kind of slipping back into happiness as feeling good, and you've already acknowledged Lucy and Richard and you, Tony, that doesn't mean feeling good. Happiness does not mean feeling good. So we don't need to go back and talk about that anymore because we know that's not what happiness is meant. Happiness means living a good life.
Doing good, not feeling good.
Could we think
Not
about
feeling
compare Aristotle to Maslow and his hierarchy and the idea that self-actualization is the
Yes.
ultimate goal?
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily suggest happiness. It talks about love and safety and whatever. But self-actualization, I always thought, was the thing to strive for, to be who you are and be able to express that.
Yes.
Right.
Or Camus or Sartre. I mean, the kind of self-authoring, self-actualizing heroes that emerge in their work is very much, I think, like the happiness that Aristotle refers to here. It's having the ability not just to recognize what an appropriate way of life is, but to form and shape a character that complies with, that gives you the tools to actualize that way of life.
Mhm.
It's about character more than anything else. It's not about satisfying an appetite for Chesapeake Bay crabs or for or having a place on the water. It's about this other kind of self development and self-actualization.
So these are people who have, as Ron says, good character. And what do we mean by good character? Well, what we mean is these people have certain virtues, to use his language. These people have certain good characteristics, which makes them have good character. And what do we mean by that? Well, let's look at what virtues we would say that they have. And that's going to help us to articulate these ideas better.
I read this chapter and thought about many of these issues. And last week, I met in 8 miles outside of Manhattan, Kansas, a guy who lives on this lonely farm with his wife, and and his whole career has been working as a craftsman, making the most beautiful furniture you can imagine. Everything in his house should be in the Smithsonian. Plus, that's the way he's made his living. His wife was a professor at Kansas State, and so forth. And just being in his house and seeing his his products was staggering to me. And this was a really good man. I've known him for years, and know his children and so forth. And he's, by every measure, had led a happy, good life. And yet, there's almost no social interaction with other people. It's his products that he's created as an artist, making beauty, utilitarian beauty. That was, his rocking chair. So, how does that work into Aristotle? And I could not help but think, well, this is a man who's led a flourishing life in a very modest situation, but he's had high standards, practiced virtues, and yet his impact, if you will, on the world, so to speak, is quite small. Anyway, it was just an interesting living example for my eyes, that with trying to translate Mike's version of the self-help book into an example right in my eyes.
Another example that has been in the news lately is former President Jimmy Carter's 100th birthday, and people are praising him for being such a good person, not just after he left the presidency, but even during his presidency, he operated as a good person in that role by and large. I mean, you're so much not in control of things you have to make decisions on that you can't be a perfect president, but you can at least be trying to be a good president. And people seem to acknowledge that he was built that way in a way that a lot of other presidents have not. And so it's mostly huge praise that people have been giving him, speaking about his long life of
Yeah, I
doing
had
good.
on page 18, line at the end of paragraph 30, I had Jimmy Carter written in the margin. As we said, you need to exercise complete goodness over a complete life.
Uh,
And I think that's what you're flagging for us.
Right. yeah.
I thought of Maria Theresa, the Dalai Lama, other people who have, by all measures, lived a complete life.
At the same time, Aristotle talks about balancing virtues, about balancing inclinations that might be offsetting, where finding the mean is the work of a person of character, trading off one set of goals for another potentially conflicting set of goals. So it may well be that there are paragons of virtue. Jimmy Carter might be one example. But I think according to the dialogue here of Aristotle, finding that mean is maybe even more important than aspiring to be perfect.
Yeah, it's a lecture, not a dialogue.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I think
wrong
we better.
philosopher, wrong course.
I think we better stop there, and we'll be going on and looking at the virtues. So let's head in that direction. I'm going to send out something that deals with Tony's question about being well brought up. I've got a nice quotation from a novel about that. So I'll send that out, and anything that you think of that might be helpful. You all have our email addresses. I'll include Lucy in the very next one so that you can add her to the list.
I have a question.
Thank you.
I need some clarification between chapters and books. So what I have,
Yeah,
is that what everybody's using?
that's what. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Okay.
what we all should be using.
Yes.
Right.
So now they have books, 1, 2, 3, so on.
Yeah.
We've been talking about books 1, 2, 3.
No, we've been talking about book 1.
Book 1, chapters 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Book
Well,
one.
there's more, isn't there? 4. How many chapters are there?
There are 13.
Book one, yeah, has 13 chapters.
9, 10, 11.
13.
13.
Is it 13?
So for next
So
week,
now we're doing
For
Book
next
two.
week, we're going to
Book-
look at book 2.
book 2.
Book
Book-
2.
So page 28 to 46.
Yep. So that's where we're heading.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Is that clear, that, Dodie?
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. See you next week, and if you have a note you want to send everybody, or if you only want to send it to certain people, that's okay too. Okay.
Thank
See
you.
see you
Very
next
good.
week.
Thank you very much.
Everybody.
Thank you.